Hello, and welcome to The Knowing Show. I am your host, Christene Marie, and tonight we are talking all things spiritual intelligence. Sundays, we focus on this intelligence. The rest of the week, we talk about emotional, intellectual, sometimes physical intelligence, but primarily we focus on the activation of the right side and left side of the brain throughout the week. And I love Sundays. They end up being a little bit uncomfortable for me in some ways, simply because spiritual intelligence is something that is and has been so personal throughout my entire life. And there's a lot of work that I've done to undo things. And there's a lot that I see in the world around me that is really painful around misunderstood spirituality and spirituality that actually has. That isn't spirituality at all and actually has the wrong brand associated with it. And that's part of what I do at the Knowing Agency and with Foundation First and Craft and Calling is working on branding and working on the manner in which people show up online, from executives to large conglomerate organizations. And brand is really important. And it really, really sets the stage for the experience someone's going to have with you. And and it also lends to adjusting the expectation from previous experience. So if someone has had a very negative experience with the church alone can set an expectation for what someone's going to experience. And if they've had a bad data set and data litany of history that has been built up over their life, when they hear church, they're going to associate a negative emotion with that, because logically they might be able to think, okay, I might have a different experience with yours, yet emotionally it's tied to decades and decades of data that has been built over a period of time. So then the question is, when we are establishing our brand, when we're establishing even the conversation of spiritual intelligence, there's a lot that can be associated with that on an emotional level based on people's past experience. And I know that for me, church was the last place I wanted to go when I was at the height of pain. Today marks the 11th anniversary of my brother-in-law getting killed by a drunk driver, and his baby girl was 3 weeks old at the time, and my sister was 26, he was 26, and it was just a hellish time, and we miss him so much. And um as I want to dig into that today. I really want to dig into the concept of healing and why that matters, even just as I was just talking about branding. And I kind of want to take it back to this time when everything fell apart, so to say. It was 2014, and when everything kind of exploded in terms of my sister moving up and dealing with, like, what is her future going to look like? And there's just this vacancy in terms of, when I close my eyes, taking the position of my sister, when I close my eyes, my entire future is gone. Everything that she and her husband had mapped out and laid forward for them was just, it was all of a sudden like a completely black hole, an abyss. And and it's the question of, am I going to traverse down this abyss that is my future, but also, in order to get to a point of, Jordan Peterson talks about, we have to go into the abyss, we have to go into the gates of hell to grab the hold of the keys of redemption. And so there's something about the moving forward process for the purpose of redemption that is the abyss in and of itself of the past. We have to move through the pain of how the past shows up today to be able to then get on the other side for the purpose of really living in the hope and redemption of a brighter future. But we have to take the steps forward to do the work of going back. And so it's this interesting place where if we just stay still and we don't do anything, we will never be able to repair and heal from the past, and we'll never really be able to move into the future with freedom. And so in essence, it's diving into the abyss. It's going into the unknown. It's going into this black pit of pain, black pit of the the unfamiliar in terms of what will come up. We don't know what's going to come up emotionally. We don't know what's going to happen on a financial level when we're in these moments of grief. And I I just am thinking back on when it all happened. We all reacted so differently. I'm one of 6 children, and we all handled it so it couldn't have been more different from how we all engaged, and then even my parents reacted so differently, and his family too. And what's so interesting is that grief can pull us together and be a bonding agent, or it can be something that separates us from each other in a way that it's almost irreparable. How can you go back? You can never go back to that moment of hearing the news, or go back to the moment of getting that phone call and then make a different action and make a different choice. So this what we're talking about on the Knowing Show is effectively going into the arena and putting in the reps and preparing ourselves for when these moments of life hit us and take us down, where how then will I live in that moment? Who's going to show up? What's going to come out of me? The outputs of ourselves in those moments are predicated on the inputs and the manner in which we've allowed for our filtration system internally to either ensure that we live and operate aligned, so that in a moment of crisis we operate in and under the guise of our ideal, governed by the divine himself, or we are out in left field. We don't even know who that person is, what's happening, but it's our fight, flight, freeze, or fawn activation system, where survival kicks in when we face fear, when we face something that's unknown, when we face grief. And so it's really the question of who's going to show up in a moment of crisis. And I really want to lean into this whole question of, branding. And I didn't actually intend to kind of go in this direction, but y'all, there's something about our preconceived notions about something, such as spiritual intelligence, as to anything in regards to religion or belief systems. Every single one of us was taught to believe something. Every single one of us has built a life on a set of core values. Every single one of us has beliefs that undergird everything we do. Every decision, every opinion, every preference is rooted in some semblance of a belief. And if we haven't taken the time to pull those beliefs out of our subconscious and pull them into consciousness and examine them, we're never going to be able to really ensure that we're living with it. Okay, my mom is, I don't know if you guys can hear, my mom's calling me on WhatsApp. And if we're not able to ensure that we're actually living with intention. The reason, when we think about branding, we all have that subconscious opinion about something. And so with this conversation of spiritual intelligence, why this matters is because, and there's a couple of reasons for this. So I want to talk about the kind of the branding of spiritual intelligence and like the messaging of it and what I mean by it. I was building my business. So my brother-in-law was killed 11 years ago, and that just totally wrecked me. And obviously everyone in my family. So kind of putting that to the side, and then enter 2020. I had never dealt with the pain and grief of that. So 6 years go by and I had never touched it. I started my own business in 2019. And about a year later, I started really leaning into emotional intelligence around the time of starting my business, and for that year after. I just really was curious as I was diving into the target audience and diving into the psychology of the human experience on the other side of the purchase. I had done some work in that throughout the years as listening to all the OGs on podcasts. And so I really got to know the psychological aspect of when somebody is in the purchase process. But then also, I just, growing up in a large family, I just always had a fascination with different people's personalities and what motivated them to make the decisions that they did. And I also loved being able to win people over and make friends. And that was just a pursuit of mine. I think empathy was always really core to me. I watched my mom model it growing up. She was just so good. She would be making friends at Walmart, sitting with people in their experience and really seeing the world through their eyes in the most loving way. And so growing up and seeing that for myself, I kind of took that into the way that we launched the Knowing Agency and the way that we did business. And so as I started leaning into emotional intelligence, I realized that it was time to do some work for myself, that I needed to heal from losing my brother-in-law. And so I started going to therapy towards the end of 2020. And as I leaned into therapy and started to get to know it, I really came to know myself in different ways. And in so doing, in that journey of knowing self, there was a forced reconciliation with different things that happened in the past. And also, how did that show up in my marriage at the time? And as I was still married, I brought to my former husband and said, I want to have an emotionally healthy marriage, and I want to see some real change for us. And that was, we had dissonance there, and we just couldn't agree on what that looked like, and he ended up leaving. And effectively, I watched my future fall apart in the pursuit of trying to heal from my brother when he was killed. And then all of a sudden it was pain compounded on pain. So I had 6 years of grief that I had yet to work through. And then with my husband leaving, it was like, wow, okay, now I've got so much more that I have to sift through and work through, much less, let's not even get to what happened in childhood and everything that I need to process from that time. And y'all, it's really, really powerful. It's really powerful how our decision to not heal can really hurt us down the line. I chose not to heal for 6 years. I actually intentionally chose to keep that pain close to me. There was something that I really loved about it. It kept me close to my brother-in-law. It kept me, it kept me as this person who really loved him because I didn't forget and I didn't really move on. And actually, his parents are still very much so in that same place today. And with the inability, so I talked at the beginning about moving forward into the abyss for the purpose of getting the keys to redemption and then coming out on the other side. But if all we do is sit at the doorstep of the abyss and just look into the blackness without ever moving into it, all we're doing is sitting in that pain. All we're doing is sitting in that grief for the rest of our lives. And perhaps we're sitting at the doorstep because we're unwilling to go in. We want to ignore it. What might happen is that, God forbid, we're ignoring it, but then we accidentally turn and look at it when we're triggered, right? Maybe something happens that draws our attention back to the abyss, and then all of a sudden we're overwhelmed. We have no capacity to handle that which we see, that which we should know, because that pain is something that is within us. And for so long it is within us, it is technically our responsibility to process, and then we can move through it and let it go. So for so long as we're unwilling and resistant of that process of going into the abyss and getting the keys of redemption, we are forever tethered to that grief, to that pain, to that story, because we have not done the work to then get to the other side and have a different ending. Right now, the ending of 20 years ago is still today. We haven't created anything new. There's no new ending. And I've never thought about it in this way before, but until we move through the abyss to get the keys of redemption, there's no new ending to the story. We are stuck forever to the ending that someone else handed to us. So the ending that was my husband handing me the divorce papers and saying, we're done. I paused because technically he didn't hand me divorce papers, and I just really, I feel like I have to be so close to the truth on this. So I paused myself. Y'all, someone else is always going to be writing our story unless we're willing to take up the the mantle of radical responsibility and do the work to excavate the abyss itself, to understand what is in there, to understand the nooks and crannies and cracks, and dive deep, and then find redemption and take it and get to the other side that is ultimately freedom. And so when it comes to brand, if our story is not being written by us, it's being written by someone else. And the whole concept of spiritual intelligence has likely been written by someone else if we have not taken up the mantle of responsibility to write our own definition of it for ourselves. I was at lunch with my siblings today, and we were kind of analyzing, man, like, what do we actually want our relationship as siblings to look like? You know, my sixth sibling wasn't there, and so it was the five of us. And we have something really precious. And we've all kind of gone and left and returned, and had our ebbs and flows around each other in terms of physical location and also relational closeness as well. And there's something about, I get to, with intention, create the dynamic which I want to have with my siblings for the rest of my life. We get to create that. All of us are co-creators in this relationship, but if we don't create with intention, it will be designed and written for us, whether it's by society, whether it's by our parents, whether it's by one person and not the other. I've been thinking about this. It's every single relationship. It's marriage, it's parenthood. We either model what was seen for us, replicate what's handed to us, or we create something new. And it's every single regard. And that's where this whole question of what do I want and who am I and what is the brand that I am creating for myself that turns then into legacy. It's such a big question, and it warrants such examination. Heck, I've done 72-hour retreats with people where we just talk about who are you in the past, and we hardly can get to the target ideal of what do you want to become. And there's obviously much more focused effort when you're just with one person, but y'all, it is wild how, if we want to do this well, it takes a good deal of time. And even still, it's not like we're ever done, right? We're constantly evolving. We're constantly changing. Actually, in the 3X Freedom community, with Qasim Aslam at the helm of it, he talked about freedom to evolve on Friday's call. He launched it on Friday. And I love that concept because so often we take our brand, we slap on, this is who I am, and we are resistant to ever change it. And I think that actually lends to people being afraid of creating a brand in the first place because they don't want to be put into a box. I know that even what I put out online, it's like, so full and expansive in terms of who I am. I was just online working on some acting stuff. Like, I'm so there's so many things that I do and so many things that I love, and y'all, that is every single one of us. So if we try to reduce ourselves down and put ourselves in a box, of course we're going to feel overwhelmed and, well, how do I ever phrase this, and I don't even want a personal brand and all that good stuff, because it's we're so we're all so unique and we're all so beautiful, and it's so exciting working with different executives to cultivate their personal brand for the purpose of building their legacy, because you're constantly adding to it and you're constantly adjusting it and you're constantly removing because that no longer serves. Y'all, if we engage with our brands the way that we do with watching our children grow up and evolve, at the very early stages they're all excited about this toy, this sports team, this pursuit or interest, and then it changes 2 years later, 2 days later. We need to allow ourselves in the cultivation of who we are to evolve and have the freedom to do that as we grow, to remove what is no longer serving us, to add and try and test new things. And it's not just, in terms of the business example, it's testing out new services and testing out different messaging and seeing what resonates. But we need to be doing that with ourselves in communication with those we love, because there could be an element of, I think I want to create our marriage to look like this. What do you think? Let's iterate on that. Let's try it out. And let's also be willing to change. I had a thought early this morning that the conjunction and has to be one of the most important three-letter words in the whole human language, and allows for evolving. It allows for the moving away from binary thinking and black and white dogma. It allows for us to add color to our lives and to our thinking, to also our spirit. Because for me to recognize, man, I've had this painful experience, I currently have a perception on the brand of what is spirituality, and and I'm willing to give it a shot. I'm willing to have the conversation around what could faith actually look like. If I were to create a new way of engaging with God, what would that look like? One that's not marked by pain, one that's not designed and curated for me, where the pathway to God is through the pastor, pope, or priest. What does it look like if I were to create this own essence of life that is in me, innately in me? Y'all, our emotions, our spirit, our soul, our mind, our intellect, our physical being, we can't help but have that be part of us. We could ignore it, suppress it, shut it down. It can be dormant, but it does not mean that it is not there. And so the question is, what would the ideal look like if I were to design it? Which is so exciting, because then we take all of our power back. We take it back from the pope, pastor, or priest. We take it back from our parents. And then once we've got all those pieces that we've taken back from these people, the beliefs that they have, and when we take them and we put them under the limelight and we say, okay, well, what do I like? What do I believe? What is right for me? Let me test some of these beliefs. Let me test some of these thoughts. Are they serving me? Are they pushing me forward to my ideal? How does this resonate with my daughter? Well, how does this resonate with my son? How does this resonate with my partner? How does this resonate with my colleague, with my employee? Y'all, every single aspect of our lives gets to be tested, iterated on, created, removed. There's so much fluidity. And the moment we put ourselves and confine ourselves into a box, and really like hunch down and get so small that someone can put a lid on top of us, that is where death begins. And on the other side of taking that lid off and pushing out the walls is creation. That is at that intersection of the removing of the old and the stepping forward. That is where we have the opportunity to create. And it is terrifying. It is so scary. I'm thinking of someone right now who came to one of our retreats, and man, the thought of freedom really almost was repulsive. It's like, no, give me the schedule, give me the list, give me the do's and don'ts, give me XYZ and ABC. Tell me what to do and I'll do it. It's a soldier. And there's a room and space and time for a soldier, which is really important. We need them. And not all of us are entrepreneurs. Frankly, the more I lean into what entrepreneurship really is, the more like, man, I'm an artist. I'm a creator. I'm not a hardcore entrepreneur. I am mission oriented rather than money oriented. And that fundamentally, the motivation is very different. And so we have all these different types of people. Thank God for that. Yet, if we're choosing to operate within a structure, that's very different than living in a box. And so we have to ask ourselves, am I free to have that and conjunction inserted in between different relationships? I have, my experience, and I'm really pissed off at you, and I see that you're mad too. So there must be something on your end that I don't understand, that I don't see, and I'm open to hearing it. And allows for both people to coexist in relationship, and means that I was hurt by the church in the past, and man, they've really messed up. And I'm open to seeing What else is there? Because I have experienced something that's real. Or someone I respect has experienced something that's real, and I'm curious. And just allows for multitudes of aspects of what constitutes just the whole big picture of what's true and what's real. And the more that you and I put ourselves within the box, it eliminates the opportunity for others to have their own experience. If we need others to come in and validate our experience, then if they're sitting over there in their experience and I'm in here in mine and you're not validating my experience, well, then you're the enemy. And isn't that really, really terrifying? Because that's how families turn on each other from the inside out. And so when I think about why spiritual intelligence matters, why the activation of every single intelligence is of the utmost importance. And the number one most critical thing you and I can do every single morning is to turn on, it's awakening, attuning to, and fortifying each one of these intelligences, the emotional, the intellectual, the physical, and the spiritual, every single morning. Activate all of them. Because without each one coming into like a boardroom, each intelligence sitting at our table to inform us and tell us what it knows so that we have the data to then make an informed decision under our ideal, under the hierarchy of the divine, we will never be able to operate within and without that box, but within the confines of freedom. And so why this matters is because for so many years, I lived with many different parts of my intelligences turned off. Just going to church, just reading your Bible, just going to religious events does not mean that our spiritual intelligence is activated. It is when I actually assume the power and take the power that is mine, my own choice, my own, between stimulus and responses choice. That's the greatest of all human freedoms, according to Viktor Frankl, author of Man's Search for Meaning, who existed in the concentration camp for, I believe it was 2 years. Choice is our greatest freedom. So if we are not activating choice when it comes to the pursuit of spiritual intelligence, if we're not learning how to move and step aside all of the inputs, not just on the digital side, our phones, TV, music, but also inputs from pastors, popes, and priests, turning them off and dimming down their voice, dimming the noise of what everyone says, and learning to listen, learning to be taught from within, learning to know the voice of God. That is learning the intelligence of the Spirit, because each one of us has a spiritual pathway to God. And so the question is, okay, well, how do I do that? And there have been a few parts and moments in my life that have really, I guess, allowed for that to be honed in and awakened, I guess, so to say. And man, this is so important. Looking at activating spiritual intelligence alone is so dangerous without the activation of all the other intelligences. You need to activate your mind. You need to activate your emotions and your physical body, because I have had spiritual encounters with God in, like, literally as I'm moving, as I'm walking, as I'm engaging with creation. I've had spiritual emotions with God when I have actually been very emotionally distraught. And that is one way that I've actually found kind of almost like this through line between me and God through the spiritual pathway, is through this concept of pouring out my soul. We talk a lot about how the lymphatic system cleanses the body and releases and eliminates it of toxins and waste. The lymphatic system does that for our brain. The pouring out of the soul is effectively what does that for our emotions. We can get so filled up with all these suppressed and unprocessed emotions that eventually we're going to react. Eventually we're going to lash out. Eventually we're going to have emotions spill out that we never intended. And so in this process of pouring out our soul, that is where then God comes and meets us. There's this really beautiful biblical text where there's this woman, Hannah, and she really wants to have a son. And for years and years and years, she's praying and asking God for a son. She finally goes on the 7th year. She's been viciously gossiped about and like verbally attacked. And man, it's like verbal and emotional abuse at this point for the fact that she cannot have a son, because back in those days, it was a mark of effectively your womanhood to be able to bear children. And so the fact she was barren, and it was also a symbol of God must have cursed you. Like you must have done something wrong to not be able to bear children. So she's an outcast. And so she finally, after I believe it was 7 years of praying, she goes, and there's this verse, and it's about she poured out her soul before the Lord, and then he met her in that moment. But it was only when she poured out her soul that it was like in the emptying out, in the release of it, could God then come and meet her and speak to her and fill that void in that chasm. So in the letting go, in the pouring out, we then make space and make room for that which could come and fill the empty spaces. And y'all, it's the same. It's the same thing in our relationships. If we're seeking so desperately for them to change, we can pray and pray and pray and pray. But the letting go, the pouring out of our soul on a daily basis over the grief that's there, over the desire for this ideal, this marriage, or this your son to come home, having these relationships preserved and protected is so the ideal. Yet we can't control other people. It takes two people, and the other person's decision, they have to want to heal. And so in us pouring out our souls is allowing for that through line between us and God, for him to come and speak to us, to minister to us, to touch our hearts, to heal our soul. And so I was talking about, what and how do we come to really know God and experience God. And one of those is not just pouring out the soul, but we have to want to heal. For 6 years, I intentionally remained unhealed. And so in so doing, I never poured out my soul to God, because I actually wanted to keep it all within. I wanted to keep those emotions of pain, of grief, of devastation. So therefore I never poured it out. I never released it. And I also, so what I would do is I would keep my emotions close to my chest and not let them go, not release them, not pour them out. But then I would be asking God spiritual, religious questions, like, how could you let this happen? And it was effectively like my arms were crossed, keeping my emotions within. Sometimes I'd be pissed off and angry, but it wasn't grief. It wasn't a release of the deep pain within. And so for so long as I kept my arms crossed and did not pour out my soul, my angry questions focusing on religion and how could you betray me like this, for the most part, there were whispered answers, but there wasn't real communication. Because in doing this and crossing my arms, I'm not letting him in. I'm not letting him actually come in and speak to me and minister to me. So how many of us exist in our lives in conversations around religion and around this pain that we carry? How many of us are actually crossing our arms and fundamentally cutting off access to the divine because we have not activated our emotional intelligence? Y'all, in the activation of emotional intelligence, in coming to know me, I have come to know God so much more. My whole life has like blossomed in coming to know him in this very deep and personal way. But it was only after I poured out my soul. It was only after kind of getting that emotional detox and allowing for the elimination thereof, and also the release of it. We have to want to heal. We have to be willing to pour out our soul. And then, man, that's where God meets us. And so we pour out our soul. We have to want to heal. And this is not in sequence. We pour out our soul. We have to want to heal. And all our intelligences have to be activated. Because if we have one turned off or one dimmed or not awakened yet, it's so hard for us to be able to really like be tuned in. It's like that frequency, you're tuning your radio dials ever so slightly, and then finally you catch a glimpse. All of a sudden you hear it. But then Once all the inputs of everyone else, whether it's religious leaders, whether it's digital apps and programs coming in, all of a sudden we lose access to that frequency because the tuning of the dial on the access to the spiritual dimension and to the divine himself, there needs to be such a purity and like almost an integrity there of the through line of that connection to him, because man, he he's just so beautiful and so wonderful, and coming to know him has just him, it's just, like, so big. I don't it's hard to even put God into. I think God means in, like, the original translation, it means the one who has no name, like, to even put him in words, it is hard to do. Y'all, if we wanna get to know God, we have to pour out our soul. We have to come face to face with the pain that's inside us. We have to come face to face with the very thing that we've been avoiding our entire life. We have to turn on our intelligences. Even just the simple act of getting the right sleep. I've been dreaming a lot over the last couple weeks, and God speaks to us in our dreams. Are we actually honoring our physical bodies? Are we honoring this vessel, this being and body that houses the spirit of God? Are we honoring through what we eat, how we sleep? Are we tending to our physical selves? Because when our body, and Jared said this last week, Jared Hoffman on the Knowing Show, he said when our body is effectively in stasis, that is when we can get new inputs. That is when we can start learning new programs. So we have to learn how to regulate our physical body to the point of being able to then even dream up and conjure something new and create something new and learn something new through spiritual divine revelation or our own internal revelation through intuition. Y'all, it's so cool that all of this is possible. And so it's like if there were a recipe, it would be through the bringing our body to a place of peace, to be able to get it to a baseline. It would be the pouring out of our soul. It would be the activating of our intelligences, every single one, tapping into each. It would be doing the work to pull our beliefs, take back the beliefs from everybody else who've given them to us. And maybe it's not even taking back, but it's just taking each one, holding it out of the limelight and choosing which ones need to be removed, which ones need to be tested, which ones actually, they're really serving me right now and maybe forever. No, there's a lot here. There's a lot here. And then finally, we have to want to heal. And that is the ultimate question. Do you want to heal? Are you willing? Are you wanting? Because at the end of the day, I've seen it time and time again, we get what we want. We do. We're really, really powerful. We both are. We're so powerful. And so the question is, what do you want? What do you want on a spiritual basis? Do you want to know a creator? And then what does it look like to actually pursue that? So thank you for joining me tonight. I'm going to drop 2 links. I'm going to drop a link to free vertical alignments for 21 days. This is a process that I go through on a morning basis. The acronym is ALIGN, ALIGN. Awaken, that's awakening the physical intelligence, awakening our bodies, just through a little bit of movement and deep breathing. It's L, listening to the emotions, awakening our emotional intelligence. It's I, illuminate. We've got to take the truth and speak it to ourselves about what is, because after we listen to our emotions, we need to actually remember what's true. Because just because we awaken each one of these intelligences, it doesn't mean that they're always telling us the right thing. It just means that they're offering data to us, and we need to learn to take it, interpret it, and then we have that choice, the greatest of human freedoms, to decide what we'll do as a response. So A, awaken, L, listen, I, illuminate the truth, and N, navigate. I will put forward a prompt about what would it look like to take this kind of vertical alignment, and then what does it look like to actually take that and navigate the world around us. And then, no, that's N. G. G is growth. G is a prompt. that moves us further into vertical alignment. And then N is how do we take this vertical alignment and then navigate in the world around us horizontally. And then the second link I will drop in the chat is a link to do a knowing assessment with me, 90 minutes. I've jumped on a phone with a couple of folks over the last 2 weeks and really good conversations. We will effectively create just a path forward for you. And so with these questions of, do you even want to heal? Those can be addressed together. They can be addressed on your own, but y'all please address it. It's so important. Your soul, your family, your relationships depend on it. Because at the end of the day, neither my husband nor I were emotionally healthy. We had no idea about emotions to begin with. And so the lack of it just led to the dismantling of our relationships, of our future. My business was growing, my business was doing great, and my world was falling apart. And so at the end of the day, this is why it matters, is because the legacy that I want to leave behind is predicated on relationships. Every part of our lives requires and is built on relational handlings. And y'all, we can be sunshine and rainbows to everyone around us, but the second we shut that bedroom door, or the second we open our front door and walk in and our kids are bracing for impact, man, we're failing. We're really failing. And it doesn't have to be the end of the story. But you and I have to activate agency over every single one of our intelligences and over the choices that we make. So that is why we do this knowing assessment together.